Hey, traveler. I hope this letter finds you well in Inazuma. Is Bal as accommodating as me? And old man Gio? I doubt it. Anyways, I remembered something, an old friend, and I'd like to introduce you to her. Don't worry, something good will happen. Just one more question. Do you still have the pieces of your strange sword? Signed, Venti the Bard. This letter had arrived a few days ago, and Ether could not stop thinking about it. Ever since he and his sister were confronted with the sustainer of heavenly principles, his beloved sword had been shattered into 4 equally sized pieces. He had been carrying them with him for what felt like an eternity. That the prospect of ever getting it repaired almost left his mind. Werner, the blacksmith of Mondstadt, had assured him this metal was so resistant to heat he would not be able to reforge it. Using a waypoint, he immediately teleported to the City of Freedom, after Her Excellency Kokomi granted him permission to do so. It took Ether mere minutes to find the Bard. It was really early, which meant he was most likely passed out drunk inside the Angel's share. Upon entering the tavern, the traveler greeted Diluc, who just grumbled back, mumbling something about a certain bard not paying his tab. Venti was upstairs, lying in a pool of spilled wine, snoring loudly.
Tone-deaf bard!
Shouted Paimon.
Is this really how a god should be presenting himself?
Is this really how a god should be presenting himself? Giggled the seemingly blacked-out bard. With a yawn, Venti got on his knees. Rubbing his eyes, he greeted. Hey, traveler, didn't expect you so soon. He yawned again.
So, who is this person you want to talk about? We are really busy, you know.
Venti rolled his eyes. An old friend.
Is it just Paimon, or do the Archons have a lot of old friends that are all mysteriously missing in action?
Ether gently slapped the pixie on the head.
Hey, what did Paimon say?
Alright, giggled Venti. Let's go. It was fascinating to see how Venti never suffered from a hangover. The bard had a pep in his step as Ether followed him outside. We're going to meet a former partner of mine.
Paimon didn't think anyone would have the patience to fall in love with the tone-deaf bard.
Venti winked at Paimon. Jealous much? The pixie puffed her cheeks and blushed, forcing herself to not meet his gaze. And after a minute and a half, she decided to vanish. I guess you two will never be friends, huh? Venti laughed loudly. What do you mean? I think we're besties. Ether shrugged and smiled. I'm pretty sure she'd disagree. The traveler followed Venti outside the city, quickly realizing that the 2 men were walking towards Wolvendom. Is your acquaintance a wolf? Venti blinked perplexed. Well, I do have a wolf acquaintance, but no, she's more than that, and would probably feel insulted if you compared her to something other than human. Ether gulped loud enough for the god to hear. Calm down, she doesn't bite. Mentally, he added, unless you ask her to. Venti blushed happily. When the 2 reached the dark forest of Wolvendom, Venti headed straight for the arena of Andreas. Stay quiet, we don't want to wake the grumpy puppy. He'd be very upset if we mess with his place. Ether gulped and followed Venti into the ancient ruin. The bard walked over to the center. Do you still have that lyre from the Windbloom Festival? Ether nodded. Give it to me. The traveler shakily gave his friend the instrument, and immediately the bard began to play. The melody was fast and intricate, familiar and beautiful. Ether blinked. Where did he hear this song before? As the bard strung the very specific chords, the ground began to emit a red glow, and the air became warmer. The stone of the ruin shook as the platform the 2 men were on began to descend. Venti was quiet, unusual for him, but his expression betrayed him. He seemed very excited. The elevator came to a halt and the animal Archon strutted forward. The traveler close behind him. Red glowing symbols covered the floor of the hallway they found themselves in. Other than that, it was pitch black. However, what worried Ether the most was the sheer nothingness of sound. The blood pumping in his veins was deafening. But at the end of the tunnel, he could see a light. Ether opened his mouth to once again wonder where they were going, but his voice just wouldn't come out. He blinked in confusion. But before he could tap on the bard's shoulder for an explanation, they stepped through the threshold. "Ah," said Venti. "Finally! I thought I was gonna die being unable to talk for so long." The bard turned around. "Welcome to the kiln." Not letting the traveler say a single word, he slapped his friend on the back, forcing him into this hidden tomb. The round dome-shaped room they found themselves in was made up of dark, masterfully cut stone. Glowing red symbols covered the walls. The two men had found themselves on a stone bridge leading into the centerpiece of the room. A round stone platform with a pool of bubbling magma quietly stood there. What is this place? The air was hot and dry. The traveler gulped as he looked into the abyss under the bridge. "The kiln! I just told you." The animal god sighed. "Okay, before we try waking her, I'll explain." The bard inhaled. "Long ago, when the Archon War waged, I was in love. She was the daughter of the god of flames, Zot. However, this still made her a god. Since her followers were artists and craftsmen, it didn't end well." He sighed sadly. "I sealed her away." Venti blinked. "And it was against her will." The traveler shrugged anxiously. "Well, not really against her will, but..." A voice began to roar through the room. "But you promised to unseal me once the war is over." Your voice was hoarse after not using it for so long. Two giant arms lifted out of the magma pool, holding onto the edge as you lifted your giant figure out of the bath. The traveler fell backwards, not expecting a giantess to emerge. Your body was made up of dripping lava, rocks, and obsidian. Your hair molded out of molten rock, and your eyes nothing more than two giant glowing red orbs. Venti anxiously scratched the back of his head. I fell asleep." You tilted your head. "Are you making fun of me, Barbatos?" Venti raised both hands in defense. I really am not. Dvalin was bad too. Trust me." You slammed your lower arms on the platform to be more comfortable. "So the oversized crocodile is still alive," you said. Venti tapped his foot on the ground. I'm sorry." You raised your body up to your navel and angrily stared down at him. "The god of freedom." You clapped your hands mockingly, sending bellowing shockwaves through the dome, once again throwing the traveler on the ground. After retaking your previous position, you turned your attention to the other intruder. "And who is that?" I'm a traveler. And Venti said you could repair my sword." Ether was afraid. You raised your fiery eyebrows. I Every blacksmith in LEWD, Mondstadt, and Inazuma, none of them are able to even work with the blade. Your interest was awoken. Can you fix it? You laughed. Of course, little mortal. Just... why would I do that? Ether went quiet. Because, said Venti, because you're the goddess of creativity, muse of the forge, patron saint of craftsmen? You smiled. You flatter me, Barbatos, but I still haven't forgiven you. Venti sighed and looked at the ground. How do you want me to atone? You blinked. Your words hold sincerity, Barbatos. I'm not used to that. You suppressed a mocking chuckle. Admittedly, I'm not used to any interaction at this point, Barbatos. Venti's lips trembled. Hand me the sword, old traveler. You placed your red glowing hand on the platform. Slowly, Ether approached your larger-than-life hand. The closer he got, the hotter the air became. He couldn't help but profusely sweat. Your hand was simply too hot. So instead of placing the pieces, he simply dropped them. Instantly, the metal pieces were absorbed into the viscous magma of your body. You leaned back, inspecting the pieces that were now floating inside you. Interesting. They are barely affected by my heat. You placed a hand on your chin and thought. This will take a while. Venti suddenly fell on his knees. Oh, thank you, he sobbed. You blinked and leaned back forward. You had a weakness for this man. Seeing him cry like that, it hurt you. But you were still too angry to just let him get away with forgetting about you. Traveler, you are excused. You may leave if you so desire. The traveler bowed respectfully. Thank you. With a slight shiver, Ether left over the bridge back into the tunnel to the outside. Now it was time for Barbatos. Quietly you submerged yourself into the liquid, only to climb out of it seconds later in your human form. A thin toga covering your body. Despite your new form, you still were taller than the bard, and coldly you stared down at him, and opened your mouth. Do you know how it feels? Venti didn't answer. You huffed and crossed your arms. What happened while I was out of commission? Venti didn't answer. Is Mondstadt still alive and well? It is, said the bard. You sighed. Barbatos, I wanted to hate you, you said in a serious tone. In fact, I did, for a very long time. You huffed. It's good you got me at a time where I was actually missing you. The bard blinked, and with blushing cheeks looked up at you. I missed you, Barbatos. No longer able to withstand the emotions he felt, he lunged forward, burrowing his head into your chest. I'm sorry I forgot about you, he cried. I didn't mean it. It's been so long. Lovingly, you combed through his hair. You wanted to say that it's okay, but you both knew this would have been a lie. Feeling his tiny, warm body against you, it was a greater feeling than you could have expected. After such a long time in solitude. his warmth, his softness. I can't believe you still walk around like this, Barbados. He hummed, and then gently pushed himself off your bosom. His face was flushed. I mean, he meant a lot to me, he said. I guess it's my way of coping with his loss. But he paused and smiled. I love it too much when you pick me up, so I don't see a reason to change it. Your smile faltered, and for a moment he thought you were upset, only to then feel your arms reach around his butt, lifting him up bridal style. With an almost drunk smile, he side-glanced you. My place, or your place? You chuckled. He blushed. I don't have a place, at least not anymore. You blinked. Are you serious? I sleep in a tavern. Also, your place no longer exists as well. You unceremoniously dropped him. Ouch, he said. Venti scratched the back of his head and opened his eyes, only to be greeted by your face, only mere inches away from him. He forced a smile and innocently asked, "What are you doing?" You went down to his ear, nibbling it a little before saying, "I'm going to let out a couple of 100 years of sexual frustration on you." You could see his body freeze for a moment, until the realization hit him like the hammer of a Fatui skirmisher. He grinned. "I have a few 100 years stored up myself," he whispered in response. Your hands reached forward as you began to unbutton his shirt, and he gently pushed you to the side so he could get on top of you, hands now sliding up your hips. "Oh, you were always so hands-on," you muttered. He smirked. "How can anyone be hands-off with a beauty like you?" You narrowed your eyes. "You're quite the charmer still, Barbados." He chuckled, his hands finally having reached your face, gently caressing your cheeks. "Such is the power of the animal god of freedom." Gently he pulled your face to his lips, warm and soft. You smiled internally upon recognizing the taste of wine on his tongue. The slimy organ was quick to move around inside your mouth, as if right now he was tasting the tastiest treat he ever got. After a minute, you took hold of his shoulders. He opened his eyes and separated from you, a thin line of spit connecting the both of you. With a smirk, you said, "Did you really think I'll let you take control over this?" With minimal effort, you rolled him over, switching positions. He averted your gaze with a flustered whimper. "You're so cute when you're under me like that, Barbados." You whispered seductively and got closer to him. "Let's make love until the moonlight shines upon your church."